I did grow up in a completely Jewish community, and there were people that I knew or knew of, more likely, that weren't Jewish and believed in Jesus, but I knew from the very beginning that Jesus was not for us.
Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. As a Jew that grew up mostly in secular or communities with small Jewish populations, I wasn't exposed to communities that were predominantly Jewish. But our special guest today, Karol Joseph, grew up in such a community and hardly knew anyone that wasn't Jewish. So how does someone that grows up in such a richly Jewish environment become a follower of Jesus? Well, that's what we're going to find out in this episode. With a master's degree in Missiology and an emphasis on Jewish studies, Karol will be sharing with us how she became a follower of Jesus. Hey, Karol, welcome to the channel.
Hi, Jeff. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I'm so grateful to have you here. So let's just get right into it. How does a Jewish woman that grew up in a rich Jewish environment put her faith in Jesus?
I love that question. I'm smiling because I love telling my story. I love remembering it because it reminds me of the power of God, who has been with me from the very beginning. And you're right, I did grow up in a completely Jewish community. In fact, I remember that there was only one non-Jewish girl in our entire elementary school. And her name was Chris, and we all felt sorry for her because she had no place to celebrate the Jewish holidays.
Oh.
But I was always aware that growing up outside of Boston is a very Irish Catholic and Italian Catholic, and there were people that I knew, or knew of, more likely, that weren't Jewish and believed in Jesus, but I knew from the very beginning that Jesus was not for us. And I remember having some friends at our beach house that were Christian, and I would always, growing up, want to go to Jordan Marsh in downtown Boston at Christmas and sit on Santa's lap and tell him what I wanted for Christmas. And for years, my parents would say, "We're Jewish, Karol. We don't do Christmas," and we didn't go. I think I broke them down around the age of 12, or no, earlier than that, maybe 9. And we went to Jordan Marsh and stood online, and I came up to Santa, and he said, "What do you want for Christmas?" And I said, "Oh, no, we're Jewish. We don't do Christmas." And he did not know what to do. I'm sure he saw others like me. But so there were always these kind of behind the curtain people that knew about Jesus. And I was very curious about him from the time I was young. I remember my friends that I met at our beach house, and they invited me to Christmas. You see, my parents always told me that we had Hanukkah, which was much better than Christmas because it was 8 days of presents, which I totally believed them until I went to these friends' house for Christmas. And when I saw what they got on that one day, compared to what I got on 8, I thought, wow, there really is something missing in Hanukkah. But it was the light of the world himself. And I didn't know that for many, many, many more years. My relatives were in Brooklyn, New York, and that's where my mother was raised. And we would go there every year for all of the Jewish holidays. And I loved the Jewish holidays. I loved Passover. I loved the high holidays in the fall. I loved being with them. My mother's uncle was the principal of a Hebrew school, and I just admired him and adored him and wanted to be more Jewish. And my family was conservative. I grew up conservative. I was the first girl in my family to be bat mitzvah because I wanted to be. And that was in the time when some did and some didn't. So I had my choice, but I really wanted to be bat mitzvah. I also wanted that uncle to give me the same Bible that he gave to my brother for his bar mitzvah, which was a big coffee table, gold Bible that had the Torahs on the front. I still have that in a prominent place in my living room, but my uncle didn't give it to me because everybody complained that a 12, 13-year-old boy didn't want that for his bar mitzvah. So my uncle gave me something else. And years later, my brother gave me his because I still wanted it and I love it. So being Jewish meant a lot to me, but I knew that something was missing from our family, from our observance, and I would ask my mother if we could become more observant. And I tried it myself on occasion. But it wasn't until I was in graduate school that I did my graduate work in healthcare policy at Brandeis University. And if you know Brandeis, it's a completely Jewish school.
Mm-hmm.
But I met a born-again Christian there, probably one of a handful that attended that school.
Yeah.
And he was the most, and probably still is, probably one of the most brilliant people I've ever encountered in my life. But he was a born-again believer in Jesus, and I did not understand how that could possibly be. And so he and I would talk about the Bible a lot. We would go have coffee, and he would ask me questions, and I would be embarrassed because he knew more about the history of the Jewish people. He knew all the kings of Israel. He knew, he just knew everything about Judaism. That amazed me. And he was so smart, but he also believed in Jesus. So this was kind of intriguing to me. And it was in those conversations that I kind of got that spark to go back and read the Bible, which I knew the stories that I had been taught in Hebrew school. As I said, I was bat mitzvah. And I was the only one in my family that really, really, really loved God, wanted to follow God, wanted to know God from a very early age, and actually had a faith that he existed. And I knew that he talked to Moses, and he talked to Abraham, and he spoke to Jacob, and he did not speak to me. And I thought that I didn't blame him, however, because if I were God, I probably wouldn't want to speak to me either. I knew very, very, very early on that I fell short of all that God expected and desired from us.
How did you know that, though?
How did I know that?
Yeah. How did you know that as a youth, or, a young Jewish girl?
Because I wanted him to speak to me like he spoke to Samuel. I lie in my bed listening and waiting for God to call me, and for me to say, Hineni, God, here am I.
Yeah.
Here am I. And when I didn't hear his voice, I thought there must be something wrong with me, because I did things wrong, as we all do. But to me, I just knew that I fell short. I fell short of observing the Jewish law. I fell short of being a good person. I fell short of having the right thoughts all the time. I just knew. I knew I had fallen short, but I didn't know how to work my way into God's good graces. And that's what I always kind of saw faith as being, that we had to do the right thing all the time, and that if we didn't, then God would be angry with us, or God would cast us out, or it just was attempt after attempt and failure after failure. So back to graduate school, I had kind of walked away, as many do, not from believing in God, but from any practicing of religion in a synagogue. And when I came back to Massachusetts after college and went to Brandeis and I met Chris, he kind of ignited my search for God. But I'll tell you what it was and it took over 4 years. I will say this was not a slow or easy process. We would debate, we would argue, he would show me things, I would read.
Mm-hmm.
Then his wife had their child, Matthew. Matthew was born with some pretty significant birth defects, which I would never have been able to manage in my own life, because I struggled with depression and despair and anxiety. I look at my life before encountering Jesus in 1988, and I call those my BC years. And they were characterized by anxiety and despair. I thought I was depressed, but really I just felt hopeless most of the time.
Same.
And with Chris, I don't know how I would have managed a child with this serious issues and challenges that Matthew faced. And he didn't even understand what I was talking about. He called them Matthew, gift of God, he told me that name meant. And that Matthew was nothing but a joy and a delight to he and his wife.
Yeah.
And I thought, the peace that passes all understanding, what I have been searching for my entire life, this is the man that has it. And I began to ask him about it. But it wasn't a direct line. And in the meantime, I had developed a pretty severe eating disorder, compulsive overeating, and I would diet, and I would have a successful diet, then I would binge, gain it all back, then I would diet, that, the whole roller coaster. And I knew it was going to kill me. I knew all the health research, but it landed me in a 12-step program. And when we talk about addiction, I'll tell you a little bit more about that. But I will say that that brought me to my knees and brought me to the point where I was willing to talk directly to God about it and say, God, if you can help me, I'll do whatever. And that, coupled with Chris, there was a moment where I decided that I was going to pray for 21 days and ask God to show me if it was true about Jesus. And my prayer was that, God, if it wasn't true, please protect me from believing in a false Messiah. Do not, the one thing I knew from all of my Jewish background was that idolatry was the worst thing. Idolatry and assimilation. To abandon faith in God, to abandon that relationship, that covenant, was the worst thing that I could do. And so as I began to think more and more about, was it really true about Jesus? I thought, what if he's just a false Messiah? And so I took it to God and I said, I'm going to pray for 21 days. And I prayed, if Jesus is the Messiah and you want me to follow him, introduce me. I felt like that little girl hiding behind my father's legs saying, who is that strange man? If he's safe, show me. And at the end of those 21 days, I don't know when it was, but Chris and I were having lunch and you said, boy, Karol, I think that you have come to believe in Jesus, that you're ready to accept Jesus. And literally my spirit leapt and I thought, oh my gosh, I think I already have. And he said, I think you have too. And we prayed together and I thought that I had arrived. I had no idea that was just the beginning.
Yeah.
Not the end of my journey.
Right. It's the beginning. Wow. It brings me to tears because the stories are different and the testimonies are different, but the Jesus is always the same. And it just brings me back to my the day that I came to faith and I knew that I knew. And anyway, thank you so much for sharing that.
I want to add one more thing though.
Please.
Because and even in telling my story, it reminds me of Israel's departure out of Egypt.
Right.
And my story is the departure out of Egypt to encountering God at Mount Sinai, which was only the beginning for Israel too.
Right.
There were still many, many years before the promised land. But that was the kind of the climax of the story, to encounter God through Jesus on that mountain.
Right. And as we study our Hebrew scriptures, we can see the parallel stories that continue to lead us to him. And if we read our Tanakh, our Hebrew scriptures with that in mind, then it's an obvious pathway straight to him. If we get stuck at Sinai and see that as the end, then we're never going to recognize Jesus.
And the fact that it was a long and winding road, it was not a straight line.
Yeah.
And so I'm never discouraged when people are struggling, because I know the words of Jeremiah, if you seek him with all your heart, you will find him and he will find you, because he's living.
Well, praise God. Praise the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Thank you so much for sharing your story. I know it'll touch many lives, and I appreciate you being here.
Glad to be here.
To find out more about Karol and her work, click on the link below in the description and stay tuned for our next episode, where Karol will be discussing the best ways to deal with addiction and how our strength may actually be our weakness. To find out more about Jews for Jesus, you can visit us and even chat with us anonymously at our website at jewsforjesus.org. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. And may you all find peace and hope in our Messiah, Yeshua.